Hello, this is the Weekly Tradecast. I'm Sarah Toms. Throughout the year, we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of UN Trade and Development with a series of special episodes. We're talking about how trade and development transforms lives and builds better futures. And we're looking at the big themes that will drive our vital work in the next 60 years. Coming up now.
So we all know how the story ends. In Geneva, 1965 is the seat of UNCTAD. But the story actually starts 18 months earlier, and it is not a straightforward road, and it is extremely interesting to see how Geneva was chosen for the seat of the Secretariat.
This week we have a special episode as we take a step back in time and also look ahead with Danielle Hughes, Chief of the Records Management Unit at the UN. To mark the 60th birthday of UN Trade and Development, world leaders and top economists convened here in Geneva to tackle the challenges of today and the future.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening of the Global Leaders Forum, charting a new development course in a changing world.
Secretary-General Rebecca Grinspan kicked off the event by highlighting decades of progress since UN Trade and Development was set up in 1964 to promote the interests of developing countries in world trade.
Your Excellencies, the promise of 1964 is alive in this room. It lives in the hearts and minds of those who had dedicated their lives to the cause of trade and development. From Raúl Prebisch, our visionary architect, to all former Secretary General whose wisdom have illuminated our path. It lives in the tireless efforts of our staff, past and present, whose expertise, commitment, and passion have been the lifeblood of this organization. And it lives in our member states and in the tables around which they have met year after year for 6 decades now. Let us be inspired by that spirit and that promise. Let's go forward together.
So how has UN Trade and Development been evolving over the last 60 years as we keep working to achieve an inclusive and sustainable future? To tell us more, we're joined now by Danielle Hughes from the UN Library and Archives in Geneva. She started her career with records for a women's religious group and worked in government before joining the UN with the International Criminal Tribunal. Well, welcome back, Danielle. It's lovely to have you here on the show. So UNCTAD, as we know, was born in 1964. In the context of that time, why was there a need to set it up as a separate agency to support trade and development?
I think the need for the creation of UNCTAD at the time was with decolonization and the creation of a lot of new countries. There needed to be a voice for these countries to speak at the United Nations.
So tell me about some of the stranger or more curious things that you and the team have found in the archives over the years.
So we all know how the story ends. In Geneva, 1965 is the seat of UNCTAD. But the story actually starts 18 months earlier, and it is not a straightforward road, and it is extremely interesting to see how Geneva was chosen for the seat of the Secretariat. So we all know that in March 1964, UNCTAD 1, or the conference that would later be known as UNCTAD 1, happened in the library. And this conference happened to be the largest international conference at the time. There was over 120 member states who were represented with over 4,000 attendees. Not much happened for the rest of the year for our story, but in December 30th, the General Assembly approves recommendations that UNCTAD 1 had adopted. Soon after that, Prebisch, who was the president of UNCTAD 1 and to be UNCTAD's first Secretary General, wrote to Spinelli, the Director General here in UNOG, saying that we are living here in very uncertain atmosphere concerning the new Secretariat. He goes on to say, no decision has yet been made as to a location. During the first session of the Trade and Development Board meeting in New York in 1965, there was a resolution to adopt Geneva as the secretariat. And this was done for several reasons. The majority of international economic and trade organizations were located in Europe.
Oh, right.
Also, they were looking for a location that already had UN entities in place so that they could sort of piggyback on the administrative and budgetary functions that were already there. So at this time, we find records in the archives stating that the Swiss representatives declare that Switzerland will do everything to facilitate UNCTAD in Geneva. We also see that the Italian representative declares that Italy was ready to accommodate UNCTAD in Rome, if need be.
Right, so we could have been in Rome.
Could have been in Rome. There were some political and logistical obligations that had to be overcome in the summer of 1965, because the decision for the Secretariat to come to Geneva was received with mixed feelings by the Swiss population. And Bern got wind of this and suggested that UNCTAD Secretariat there be located in Lausanne.
Ah.
And all of their meetings be held here at the Palais des Nations. This brought up a whole other set of issues.
I bet.
Yes. In addition to these political obstacles, there was also a logistical obstacle. Finding office space was extremely difficult because ILO and the WHO were still here at the Palais. The other challenge is that in 1964, the Palais des Nations hosted over 4,000 meetings. And UNCTAD's need for conference rooms and meeting rooms would stretch the Palais' capacity to the max. So it was clear, even at this point, before a decision had been made, that there needed to be an extension to the historic Palais des Nations. In August 1965, a UN report indicated that for political reasons and psychological reasons, it would be best to maybe reopen the debate as to where the seat of UNCTAD should be. And in the September of 1965, the second meeting of the board was here in Geneva. And the Swiss authorities had invited all of the participants, so all 55 delegations, on a boat trip on Lake Geneva. And the group was originally supposed to board the ship called l'Italie. But due to last-minute technical difficulties, they boarded the ship called La Suisse. We will just leave it there, and if you want more information, you can come and search through the archives. But this uncertainty reopened Pandora's box of location. And this allowed for other nations to put forward their petition for the headquarters. We now see the final list of possibilities that went to vote. And it is Geneva, Rome, Addis Ababa, London, Mexico City, Accra, and Lagos, although Lagos removed their name from the ballot before the vote. In October 1965, there was an extraordinary meeting that was held to make this decision because they didn't want to prolong the process anymore because we were already hitting 18 months after UNCTAD won. And on the basis of a majority, the members of the board decided that UNCTAD would be located here in Geneva. And as they say, the rest is history.
So, Danielle, you mentioned that the first meetings were actually in the library. Were there any famous statesmen that turned up to these meetings?
For me, the one that stands out the most would be Che Guevara. And there's a lovely photo of him sitting in the conference room with his placard in front of him. There were several statesmen who attended.
To end up with, Danielle, what do the archives tell us about UN trade and development and its history?
Archives are interesting because the anecdotes that we looked at in the last couple minutes don't show up in regular history books because it is not sort of the substantive history of an organization. This is the information that is gleaned when you spend time looking at all of the records that we do have. And UNCTAD archives make up over 300 linear meters of physical records in the UN Library and Archives Geneva collection. And they go back to the beginning, 1964, to present day. These archives are regularly consulted by researchers from around the world, and within these archives we can discover very many interesting stories that are very rarely part of the regular history of an entity, and we can dive into UNCTAD's 60-year history. We would like to take this opportunity to launch an appeal to UNCTAD staff and ex-staff to think about transferring their records and private papers to us so that we can continue to enrich UNCTAD's history for future generations to come. Because it is not only the official records of the UN that provide insight into how an organization worked, but also how individual staff members and people who had contact with UNCTAD assist us in discovering more about its history and looking towards the future.
There's also a museum here at the Palais, isn't there?
Yes, there is. So we have a UN Archives Museum, and the displays feature archives and records from the collection that we have here in Geneva. Unfortunately, at the moment, the museum is closed and should be opening fairly soon. So keep your eye out for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was UN's Danielle Hughes, who was this week's guest. Tune into the weekly Tradecast next week and every week for more insights on the most pressing issues around the world of trade and development. And there's even more on our website, unctad.org. I'm Sarah Toms in Geneva. Goodbye for now.